In the months leading up to 9/11, President Bush announced a new national energy policy on May 17, 2001, in which he called for increased U.S. reliance on the Persian Gulf, on the Caspian Sea, on Africa and Latin America to supply even more and more oil to the United States. And he saw this as requiring a military buildup to protect the flow of oil. So then 9/11 came along and provided the excuse or the justification for accelerating the process of inserting American military power into this region and to the Caspian and Africa and Latin America, the fight against terrorism. But the strategic roots of this policy were in place before 9/11. 9/11 just gave a rationale that could be sold to the American public to do something that they wanted to do anyway.
My question is, why did you really want to go to war?
Yeah, I think your premise, and all due respect to your question and to you as a lifelong journalist, is that, I didn't want war. To assume I wanted war is just flat wrong, Helen, and all due respect. No, hold on for a second, please. Excuse me. No president wants war.
That they had to convince the American people that the war in Iraq was about the 9/11 tragedy, to connect the two. And they did this in some unsubtle ways and some very subtle ways.
Even journalists can't decide whether this administration has lied on the subject of Iraq. And even if they were wrong or they misled, was it inadvertent or was it willful?
President Bush has said Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Tony Blair has said Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Donald Rumsfeld has said Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Richard Butler has said they do. The United Nations has said they do. The experts have said they do. Iraq says they don't. You can choose who you want to believe.
إذا كنت لا تملك شيئا فلا تستطيع أن تقدم شيئا. فإذا لم تكن لدينا هذه الأسلحة فكيف نستطيع أن ننزعها؟
But in the Pentagon, we kind of knew this already, right? Because we had access to the intelligence. So when people said Iraq, terrorism, and WMD, it wasn't necessarily a natural connection. Certainly no relationship with Al-Qaeda that was of any relevance. I mean, obviously, do Al-Qaeda people pass through? Well, we had more Al-Qaeda in Florida than they ever had in Baghdad.
It's not only this idea of the psychological message, but it's also the idea of finding ways to capture your imagination and tie you to the message.
This forced several hundred people to undergo emergency medical treatment and killed 2 postal workers, just from an amount just about this quantity that was inside of an envelope. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax.
If you create the fear, which is to repeat the terrorism thing, then people are more susceptible to the suggestions that go with the message or the campaign of information operations.
The question is, how does the public separate fact from fiction when everything has an element of fiction? They have come after a national crisis and trauma like September 11th. Their natural instinct is to support the president and believe their president and their commander-in-chief.
September the 11th meant that we had to deal with a person like Saddam Hussein. Now, of course, I was hoping it could be done diplomatically, but diplomacy failed. And so the last resort of a president is to use force. And we did. And now we're helping the Iraqis.
He gave us 3 reasons for going to war. 1, Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Number 2, there were connections to Al-Qaeda. And number 3, he was a horrible person. Well, only one of them turned out to be true.